Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're ready to start. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm Malcolm Harbour. I am an associate with Connected Places Catapult, and particularly providing advice for the challenging procurement programme, which is my particular interest. And I spent 15 years in the European Parliament working on many of the public procurement directives, as well as many other aspects of the internal market. So it's a special pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. We have 150 people registered, which is great. Thank you very much to those football enthusiasts who've taken the time to see us so they can watch the football later. And just a few remarks, first of all, before I ask Ollie Kirsch, who runs very successfully the challenging procurement programme, to introduce the programme and the speakers. But just some opening remarks. First of all, this session is going to be recorded, and it will also be live streamed as well. So if you have any problems with running it online through your internet, you will be able to see it on our live streaming channel. And the really important thing I want to emphasize is that we're really keen to make this a lively discussion, which I will be chairing later. And we'd very much like your questions if you would put them on the question and answer feed, so I can see them, and I will then direct the key issues that concern you to the panel. It would be great also if you could tell us your name and organization, and if you have a particular question for a particular panelist, then let me know by putting that before your question. So that's a point particularly to remember, and also to say that all other participants, of course, can also see the questions, and they're very welcome to start a discussion or even to answer some of the questions in advance. Please do that, because it makes it a very lively session. So that's my introduction, and I'm now going to hand over now to Oliver Kirsch.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Malcolm. And welcome to today's session on the co-creation project to drive innovation. For reference, we will be circulating the slides and a recording of this session to all registered participants later today. But for introduction, my name is Oliver Kirsch. I am the Strategic Futures Lead at Connected Places Catapult, and I lead our challenging procurement programme. For those who are joining these sessions for the first time, the role of Connected Places Catapult is to foster innovation and break down barriers to market, with a particular focus on placemaking, such as transport and built environment sectors. And procurement is a facilitator of innovation across these sectors in particular. So we have put together the challenging procurement programme with the aim of supporting both public authorities and innovative suppliers. There have been some really interesting developments in this field over the past few months, including proposed regulatory reforms in the Green Paper just before Christmas, and the upcoming procurement bill announced in the Queen's speech. And additionally, many of you may have seen that a recent procurement policy notice from the 3rd of June places a requirement on contracting authorities to consider innovation in their activities alongside some other key factors, which is one of the things that we had recommended in our response to the Green Paper. So it's very nice to see that being implemented. If we just hop on to the next slide. One of the other things we should just point out is that Connected Places Catapult have recently launched the CRISP group, which is our partnership with some luminaries from the universities of Birmingham and Manchester, and with whom we are looking at methods for better measuring and understanding the impact of innovation procurement approaches. I think this is a very timely topic that sits nicely alongside the aforementioned reforms, and hopefully will allow us all to think about how best to take advantage of the liberalisation. We're happy to speak to anyone else in the area who is interested in collaborating on this topic, and I'm sure we will present some preliminary findings of this research later in the year on this series. So if we just hop to the next slide, please. The agenda for today's session is that we will have each of our three speakers present for around 10 minutes each, just to give an overview of their experience in relation to co-creation projects, after which we will move to an open panel session, and we'll be looking to discuss the questions put forward by you, the audience. If we don't get to all of the questions, or there's some very specific detailed ones for particular panelists, then we may well take these offline and come back to you separately in an email. So before we move on to the detail, the meat of this meeting, we'd like to pause at this point and just to get to know you as the audience. Again, if you could just pop up the first poll, please. Those of you who have joined us before will recognise these questions. So it just asks about your role and the type of organisation that you work within, and helps our speakers tailor their presentation and the discussion a little later on. So if we just give a minute or so for you to pop those answers in. And if we look at the results here. There we go. Oh, great, excellent. A mix of different roles and organisations, quite a few in organisational management roles, and a real mix of different types of organisation, which is great to see. So we'll make sure that we try and address the discussion around both the procurement side and the needs of SMEs and suppliers. So as we can see on the slide here, we have three very interesting speakers for you today to talk about innovation projects and co-creation. The first of our speakers is Greg Green, who is the head of R&D projects at the innovation team for the Welsh Government and is responsible for public sector challenge-led innovation. He works with funders such as Innovate UK to promote and align Welsh innovation strengths to their funding opportunities, and to develop local innovation policy, Welsh innovation networks, and industrial clusters. The second of our speakers is Freya Lockwood, who has nearly 20 years experience in private and public sector innovation, strategy, and change, and has made a career out of leading initiatives that fall into the too difficult box. She recently started a new role with the West of England Combined Authority to lead digital transformation, and was previously at Bristol City Council leading their smart city agenda and the city innovation team after many years of having worked in high-tech multinationals. And last but not least, we have Ryan Goodman, who is a Living Labs manager in the urban technology team here at Connected Places Catapult. He joined Catapult last November from the Open Data Institute, and for the last 5 years, his background has been in challenge-led and data-driven innovation. He's previously delivered several EU-funded open innovation programs that looked at supporting data-driven SMEs to test and develop their different solutions. So we'll look forward to hearing from each of those. Just a reminder, as Malcolm mentioned, as we go through these discussions, if you can just pop any questions that you have in the Q&A section, we'll gather those together and use them as the feedstock for our panel discussion in a moment. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Greg.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Malcolm kindly asked me to come along and present today about co-creating innovation from a Welsh Government perspective. So in the main, we'll talk a bit about SBRI, Small Business Research Initiative, and our experience to date. as well as the GovTech program that some of you are familiar with as well. So trying to get alignments with the host today, and obviously with Connect, Spark, Accelerate as the strapline. What I tried to do is just put alignments of what we've done in Wales regarding sort of innovation and procurement. So we've connected to date over 26 public sector challenge owners with innovators. The Spark we managed to do that was with our SBRI Catalyst program. So SBRI, I'm sure many of you are aware, has been around for a long time now. It's the UK version of the US SBIR, and it's pre-commercial procurement. So it was established, but not very well used. So we tried to knock down a few barriers to the public sector, and one of them was access to finance. So we provided a catalyst support program. We had some co-funding from Innovate UK to help get off the ground. And then so far we've processed over 700 applications, new ideas for opportunities for the public sector. And like all good innovation, not all of it fits the mold. There's no wrong door. We move them on or try and support them into other areas of innovation support if SBRI and the pre-commercial procurement route is not for them. So we've awarded over £8 million worth of contracts, and over 40 Welsh businesses have benefited. Obviously, it's a UK, even EU-wide program. So when we published the challenge, we've supported businesses from all across the UK and even Europe as well. But we like to try and find and encourage Welsh solutions for Welsh problems wherever possible. So where did it all start? So back in May 2012, Wales launched the All Wales Coast Path. It was, I believe, a world first of one of the few countries you can walk all the way around the perimeter. Tourism colleagues thought, we've got this asset. How do we maximize it? What can we do to really kickstart it? So we engaged with local stakeholders, Ordnance Survey, the Geovation team there, and Ramblers Cymru, and we colleagues in digital tourism. So we had a very small budget. We looked at digital solutions. They shared £125,000. We learnt an awful lot from the experience of trying to get this challenge-led process off the ground. So what we decided, we need to scale up. Hence, we went for the Catalyst Fund. And then since then, here's just a slide highlighting some of our other projects. And I think it's always useful to bring them to life, because when you talk about the SBRI process, a lot of people don't really understand what it is, how it works, and what the outcomes are. So by telling a few little stories, I think hopefully it will bring it to life. So on the top left there, we had reducing motorcycle casualties in Wales. There was, statistics were stubborn. They're on the downward trend, but they wouldn't go below a certain level. So road safety colleagues wanted to see if there's anything that they could do. And so we ran a challenge. It was probably our most attended event that we had when you could hold physical events. And that's gone on to do good stuff as well. Next, we had South Wales and Gwent Police Force looking at next generation predictive policing. So a bit like Minority Report, if you know the Tom Cruise film, but seriously, it was station sergeants making use of all the data feeds that they have, prioritizing for patrol strategies and making sure that they had delivered an excellent service in those communities. And then going down there, portable renewable energy generation. Cardiff Council, I believe, was the first council in the UK to run an SBRI. So what they wanted was meanwhile use of brownfield sites in the district. So could they put rapidly deployable energy, school playing fields, brownfield sites, future gen sites, and make some impact with those sites. Health colleagues in North Wales, they did one for acquired brain injuries. National Resources Wales have been a serial user of SBRI now. They've done invasive non-native species for aquatic and land-based and soil remediation. They did a really interesting one around metal mine water remediation. And on the top right, they did one around fenceless fencing, which was one of our very first ones and caused a lot of interest because of its title. And this was to do with upland watercourses being protected from livestock entering, eroding riverbanks, polluting water, and eating freshly planted trees, etc. as well. So Cardiff Council did one improving the energy performance of old and historic buildings, so the old housing stock in Wales. So they wanted some measures to improve those. We have a very comprehensive health database in Wales. So we wanted GPs to have a dashboard to make informed decisions about how to use their spending budget. Next to the one, how can we enable nurses to spend 10% more time with patients in direct value-added care, was probably one of our really interesting ones in terms of once they did the reflective look at what they achieved by the use of capture data once, use it many times, and a hand device by the nurses, they actually were achieving over 20% efficiencies through that process as well. So a really, really massive impact on value-added care rather than administration. Another one of our councils did one around mattress recycling. They were already on board with stripping out the string and the steel springs and the wood, but they wanted something to do with the upholstery and the cloth and the fabric. So we were trying to find solutions which prevented that from going into landfill. And finally, on the right was how can we improve the nutritional composition of food and drink for children whilst driving down costs? So this was a combined affordable quality food, but also reducing, trying to tackle childhood obesity as well. So the food one I just mentioned, that we entered the government awards, Government Opportunity Awards last year, and that particular challenge won Procurement Innovation of the Year, taking the winning prize there. And then it also actually took the overall excellence in the awards. We were very proud of that as well. Some other notable achievements along the bottom pictures there, you can see a long black strip in front of a building. That's an island called Flatholme off the coast of Cardiff. And that's the Warden Station. And this is Cardiff's portable energy, so portable renewable energy deployed, providing energy to that site. The center picture there is the Motorcycle Challenge, which is a spin out from Imperial College in London, where the funding they invested in the test rig, which to help improve or help inform EU standards, because they realized that current testing was a flat impact, whereas in most motorcycle incidents, there was an oblique sort of impact. So a lot of testing, validation, and data was provided from that test rig. And I mentioned the metal mine remediation, this sort of Mars lunar landscape sort of effect was an old Roman metal mine from Gogh in West Wales. And the National Resources Wales were so impressed that they funded continued pilot studies of the technologies that we used to make sure that they were getting the right data. Moving on from our experience in SPRI, because we had done a number of them over the years, when the GovTech team was established, they reached out and asked to say, well, you guys have got some experience, can you help? So we gave them some information and advice on all the back office process, but it also gave us the opportunity to promote heavily within our public sector bodies. And we managed to secure 5 million of the 20 million pound that was on offer from the GovTech Catalyst program around digital and data solutions. So we had Monmouth, who was tackling rural loneliness and transport issues in the rural countryside. We had real-time tracking of firefighters from Mid and West Fire Service. This was very important, obviously post-Grenfell, where there were some issues identified. And the GovTech team were very impressed with this whole project. I was working with those guys. Blaenau Gwent, a unitary authority in South Wales, and in conjunction with Durham, they wanted to use their fleet assets, the refuse trucks, the recycling trucks, to be the boots on the ground, eyes on the street. So having monitoring and data equipment on these, so road surface assessments, fly tipping, air quality, or, a host of different sensors that they could deploy and use that as these vehicles actually crossed every road and street in the county. And then on the fourth, Torfaen was another council in South Wales using digital technology to improve adult social care. So again, we really embraced the GovTech thing. We really liked it, and I hope it comes back around again because we've got some good ideas from our local authority and public sector bodies in Wales. Just in terms of SPRI in response to COVID, we thought the whole process was a fantastic opportunity to accelerate and dive into the deep end straight away and trying to get some solutions which were emerging problems. The problem that we had was in parts of Wales with rural isolation and cleaning stations, it could take an ambulance out of service for up to 3 to 4 hours in terms of the ability to transport a COVID patient, clean it to the required standard, and then put it back onto its use. So we got together with a whole host of people, including MOD, DASA, the guys at Porton Down, and we ran a 5-week accelerated SPRI. We got over through 219 applications, And what we wanted to do is have a rapid sanitization technology to get these ambulances turned around as quick as possible. And some of the technologies came through, there's a whole range, but the most promising ones which were tested to put them down were fogging and wetting technologies, which didn't damage the interior and the equipment, etc., of the ambulance. And it reduced cleaning time by as much as 86%, reduced the cost of cleaning an ambulance by 82%. And new solutions would have taken 45 hours instead of the 330 odd plus hours as well. And this was to the gold standard cleaning of a log kill 6. So, and those solutions are really advanced now into the procurement cycle of the Wales Ambulance Service Trust in North Wales. And again, we got recognition for that one. We had the St David's Awards in Wales. And as you can see on the left, the SBRI Welsh Ambulance Service Trust was the winner in the innovation, science and technology. So again, this challenges to procurement, how to do things. Hopefully these examples can give you some comfort that it is a tried and true process where you can take advantage of using the SBRI. And there's lots of people who would give you advice and guidance with Innovate UK and ourselves. But please do consider it if you haven't done so already. So if you're on the call today and you work for a public sector body in Wales, you can have an expressions of interest form, just innovate at gov.wales, subject SBRI, and then we can pick up the conversations for you from there. Okay, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Greg. Very interesting to hear about all of those different projects you've been running. And we'll look forward to digging into more detail in a moment. But for now, if we move on to Freya to present for the next section, please.
Hi, Oliver, Malcolm, really good to be here. And really great presentation from Greg, really interesting to hear more about the sort of challenge owner side of the procurement cycle. What I want to spend the next 10 minutes doing with my slides is share my personal thoughts of co-creating innovation, primarily from the supplier side. So when Oliver was introducing me, he sort of indicated that I've had a lot of experience contract innovation. A lot of the time would be responding to challenges such as those that Greg has just shared. And I want to talk about just, draw on that experience of leading that corporate research and innovation projects for people who had really challenging, complex problems to solve. But I'm also going to share a quick case study from my previous role in Bristol City Council. I was leading their smart city agenda and the really fantastic city innovation team. And that is a brilliant example of co-creating with a community and de-risking the whole innovation process. And then I'll wrap up by just sharing why I think we need more challenge-led outcomes-based procurement, very akin to what Greg's been sharing. So it's a perfect segue. Could you go to the next slide, please, Leanne? So I just want to go back to basics a little bit. And before I dive into this slide, I just want to recap what is innovation. So it's a word we bandy it around, but it means different things to different people. So for me, it's many things. It's new methods, it's new ideas, it could be new products, new services. At its heart, it's always about challenging the status quo to do better things or do things better. There's an element of innovating to deliver more value or save money or mitigate risk. And for me, it's all about being curious and questioning how can we do things differently. It can be really radical innovation that upends everything and sort of very transformational, or it can be baby steps and really small incremental changes. And I think that is part of the challenge, but depending on where you are in those extremes, but it's always messy. That's a given. And that's the bit that I really want to focus on. So I'm sure you've all seen this diagram elsewhere. It's a bit of a classic, but it's so true. And just from my personal experience, if we want to co-create and we want to innovate, then we need to embrace this mess and understand how, in the ways in which we manage innovation and how we set up that procurement container, how do we hold the space for this ambiguity and uncertainty and enable people to go on that journey of discovery to understand how do they solve their challenge and what the solutions might look like and what are the right solutions for them in their context. So it doesn't run in a straight line. I would say a lot of the time, so things like SEI are a lovely counterpoint to this, but procurement processes, delivery contracts, project plans, all seem to run on the assumption that innovation goes from A to B in a straight line and it's nice and neat. And they're all designed to engineer out the mess and the ambiguity, quite rightly, because that's where the risks lie. And if you're delivering a standard project, very waterfall, where you can clearly define a solution at the start, those approaches are great, but you're not procuring innovation. You're procuring a known solution. So I would say, adopting a standard procurement approach is good practice, but when you're starting out on an innovation journey, as Greg was saying, challenge-led. So at best, you know what the problem is. Possibly. You probably know what your challenge is. You may not know your root causes. So it's unlikely until you start to really dig into the work to understand the space that you're going to know, one, how to solve it, and two, what procurement is, what solution is going to be the best. So could we go to the next slide? So my sort of, again, advice and experience is, first, you've got to understand the problem. And a lot of the time that means counterintuitively taking a step backwards from where a lot of projects and procurement spaces start. So the design thinking has an amazing model for understanding why this is the case. Some of you are going to be familiar with the Design Council's double diamond model. You may or may not know that they updated it recently to show that it's really, really relevant, not just for product design, but also innovation. And what it clearly shows you is that you really need to start with a challenge, and you've really, really got to dig in and understand that. And really understand what is the problem you're trying to solve before you go on to move, developing the solution. So the whole approach is premised with engaging with stakeholders and users and co-creating with them through the whole sort of first understanding your problem and then co-designing that solution. So it's not just at the end when you think, okay, well, I know what my challenge is. I'm going to put out that sort of challenge-led procurement, and then we'll co-design the solution. A lot of the time I found that you've got to go backwards to that and go through the journey of that first diamond on the left-hand side and work with your customer and your users to go, okay, this is the challenge you think you've got. Are you sure? Let's just go back and do that discovery piece. And what this does is, again, for me, it's all about de-risking. So this going back makes sure that you're designing the right thing, that you're really clear about the problem that you're trying to solve, and that the solution being developed addresses that and will reflect people's wants and needs. And what this model acknowledges is, you've got to iterate. Again, it comes back to this idea about mess. And so what quite often when I would be responding to invitations to tender in the past, even if it was challenge-led, we would still design into our proposal and our response a discovery phase, just to leave space to be able to go back through that first diamond. And often, we could shortcut it. When we had the kickoff meeting, we would discover, yes, actually, along with the client, we can be really confident that the problem and the challenge is really well understood, but we had left the space just to do that confirmation check and make sure that, you know, we could really deliver the outcome that was needed. Could we go to the next slide, please, Leanne? So the case study that I want to share was delivered by my colleagues in Bristol City Innovation Team. That's their flagship Smart City project. It's an EU research and development programme. And they had their heart, their ethos was around working with communities and partner organisations to explore how cities can use new technologies to help meet some of the energy, transport and social inclusion challenges. And they, throughout the 5-year programme, use this methodology called the Bristol approach, which has a lot of similarities with design thinking in that double diamond model I've shared with you. But it evolved from community development methods, which very much is rooted in using the strengths and the existing assets that you know are within that community already, and involving them throughout the whole innovation process. And it recognises that the community understands their context best and is really well placed to shape both the problem understanding and the solution. So this example, the project team knew that they wanted to create a community engagement platform, and in their head, they had also thought about the solution that they might want to try and deliver. So they'd come up with the idea of an electric van with education and engagement material inside of it. But what was fascinating and really insightful is when they engaged with their community engagement group that was established to help co-design and steer and deliver the project, the community stakeholders were really clear. The last thing that they wanted was yet another vehicle on their already congested, polluted streets. And so the image you see at the bottom was what was actually wanted and what the community co-designed. And again, you know, so they designed this smaller pop-up mobile future home. It was using local makers to design and build it. And for the project team, this really, really drove home how important co-creation is. And also being open to change plans based on the wants and needs of your stakeholders. And since then, you know, they've really found that this approach has led to better outcomes and greater levels of project ownership and trust within the communities. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? And so I've taken you on a really quick canter as to why I think co-creation is a good approach for innovation, how it can de-risk the process, and I've touched on with the case study why I think it leads to much, much better outcomes. On this slide, I want to wrap up by talking about why it's also really important to understand where you are in the innovation journey, both from a procurement perspective, but also from a co-creation perspective. I really like this model from the CPI because it brings together lots of different but really, really important elements. So you have the innovation life cycle at the bottom that, in a nutshell, from the left to right, runs from I have an idea, I have a little spark, I don't know whether it's feasible, I need to do maybe some really basic research, proof of concept. I might then need to move to test, well, is this feasible? You know, is this solution, has it got X? Through to more mature stages where you're doing technology demonstrations or solution demos. And then you're beginning to prototype and move those through into sort of pilots and then scale up. And then very finally on the right-hand side, you've got a new innovation that's proven and you're looking to launch it and commercialize it. And then the next layer, you've got the TRLs, the technology readiness levels, which pretty much mirror your innovation journey, but that is all about the maturity of your solution. So how mature, and when you're sort of on the left-hand side, again, you have a very immature, unproven solution all the way through to something that on the right is market ready and it has customers or people who are willing and wanting to use it. For me, the power of this model is the elements at the top. So I found over time that depending on what it is you're procuring or the kind of innovation project that you're setting up, if you're more on the left-hand side, so you're sort of low maturity, lots of ambiguity, you're not quite sure whether what you're proposing or what you're responding to is going to work, then academia, so universities, research centres are amazing partners for that. That is their bread and butter. And it's all about developing your knowledge and your understanding of what is possible. If you're on the right-hand side, industry is a great partner. They're who you want to be co-creating with. So, you know, that they understand the markets, they understand customers, they understand how to sort of deliver and commercialize innovation. Where I've spent a lot of my time is that space in the middle where you already know something is a viable proof of concept. What you're trying to do is get across that valley of death, as it's called, so that you have something that is viable and proven in service or you can commercialize. And there, I would look to co-create with both academic and industry partners, because what you're trying to do is in effect applied research, and you need the skills and strengths of both. And throughout that, I think, you know, if you're setting up a sort of challenge-led procurement, using this model to understand, well, what is it? Where am I in that life cycle? Where am I trying to get to? Really how bound and enables people to sort of respond with a much more thoughtful, detailed proposal. And throughout that, you know, that outcome where you're trying to get to, that's your North Star. And again, that helps everybody just stay on track and understand what part they have to play in that sort of co-creation process. So just to wrap up, and I'm just looking at time. For me, innovation is really a journey of discovery. So it's messy, there's lots of uncertainty, ambiguity, and I've sort of stressed that quite a bit. But for me, it's critical in understanding and understanding how best that you manage the innovation, because however you set up your procurement, however you set up your co-creation, innovation delivery plans, you have to hold space for that mess and the ability to iterate and be really flexible as you go on that journey and learn what works, what doesn't, what fails, what's successful, and be able to go back. And also recognize that, you know, the solution that you have in your head at the beginning most likely isn't going to be the one that's needed or the one that you end up delivering. So again, it's holding space and enabling the flexibility to be able to change tack and veer and haul as you find things out. And for me, if I bring it back to the procurement, for me, that's the challenge. Having sat both sides of the fence, it's challenging trying to, you know, design a challenge-led procurement process where you're trying to define what you want without closing things down so much so that you can't go on that co-creation journey with whoever responds and you choose as your partner. And equally, if you're responding to a procurement request, it's how do you give your customer the confidence to take them on that journey and manage the risks involved to enable them to get to the outcome that they're wanting to. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Freya. That's really interesting to hear discussed. And I think a lot of the themes that you raised there chime with some of our experience, in particular building in that flexibility and and stages perhaps to allow you to explore different parts of the understanding the problem, understanding solution, and so on. I'm sure Ryan is about to discuss that. Just before I get around to start his slides, can I just ask that any questions that people have in relation to this topic or that people have for our speakers, can they add those into the Q&A section? I think maybe the heat is getting to everybody today, as we've had fewer questions than we would normally get, but I look forward to discussing those after Ryan's piece here. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. If we could go to the next slide, please, Liam. Thank you. So as kind of mentioned at the beginning of the intros, I'm Ryan. I'm a Living Labs manager within the urban technology team at the Catapult. Today, I'm going to give a kind of short overview of our experience of fostering innovation through co-creation methodologies and where we are effectively applying this approach next, that could be relevant or of interest to people potentially at this session, as you might be working within the space already, not necessarily from an industry perspective, but also from SMEs or from other like-minded potential partners who see an interest of potentially engaging with us. So if we get to the next slide, please, Leanne. Thank you. So I guess just firstly a bit about the urban technology team and who we are, considering it's been mentioned a few times. So we specifically sit within a wider directorate at the Catapult, which is the Applied Data and Technology team. Our specific mandate is to proactively identify unaddressed problems faced by places and to lower barriers to entry for SMEs to either test, develop, and showcase scalable solutions for wider adoption. We do this by running and scoping out either test beds or living labs. These involve multiple different stakeholders such as local government, private sponsors, academic bodies, or SMEs. And our main kind of intention really around that is to deploy appropriate technologies that demonstrate positive impact and try to maximize value. We have a breadth of experience within the team more generally. We work kind of agnostically across technology. And what we kind of do is bring a combination of kind of user design and user research into our approaches to delivering innovation. And we combine that, I guess, with the research and the understanding of what kind of challenges should we actually be intending to address, and how can our research potentially inform future policies around the way in which places operate, or potentially inform other people within the space to potentially carry on or to support in terms of sustainability of certain assets or programs and deliver follow-on work. If we go to the next slide, please, Leanne. Thank you. So I guess what approaches do we specifically focus on within the urban technology team? So how do we kind of deploy and test solutions? Our approach covers a number of kind of different innovation methodologies within the market. Overall, our kind of approach is focus on the application of technology, because as a team, we're more concerned with understanding the actual impact and functionality of a technology rather than supporting the business. The reason why I say that is because, as you can see from the slide, we've actually grayed out the kind of accelerators, which is supporting the kind of business growth. Although we as a team do not specifically focus on that, Catapult obviously does, because they have an SME directorate that deliver time-bound, time-specific programs that support the scalability of businesses. We focus purely on the kind of demonstration impact of the actual technology itself. We also kind of recognize there's loads of different approaches in the market, more specifically to testing out new solutions. When it comes to co-creation specifically, we focus on deploying or developing solutions with SMEs through running kind of living labs. As we see this approach more specifically to building new solutions at an early stage TRL level around the kind of needs of end users or potentially with citizens in mind. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I guess what's our kind of a bit experience more specifically around co-creating, and especially in relation to delivering living labs. So we've developed a broad understanding of co-creation over the past kind of 5-6 years. We've done that through delivering a number of EU-funded innovation programs. This has allowed us to effectively gain a breadth of expertise and experience in order to kind of refine what best practice looks like for the Catapult. So in order for us to actually create frameworks and methodologies around how we should foster and support co-creation to take place through our programs. All of these kind of programs that have been funded in the past have been done so in consortiums, as the nature of kind of EU programs more generally. The Catapult's role's kind of been supporting the research and understanding, I guess, the root causes of the challenge, not necessarily the symptoms, which is something Freya, I think, picked up on previously in her presentation. And we've delivered, again, a number of these kind of EU-wide programs that focus on many different challenges that range from, I guess, smart mobility to air quality to the smart transport and different modes of multimodal transport more generally. From a combination of these programs, we've supported, I believe, over 100 or so SMEs to support kind of solutions to address challenges that are faced by cities around the EU. In combination with these, we've kind of delivered a number of different living lab programs within the wider program themselves. So iScape was specifically a combination of 5 living labs in 5 different cities across the EU, which looked at addressing more specifically or addressing and developing scalable solutions to help support sustainable air pollution strategies and policy interventions to inform kind of behavioural changes around the way in which cities should potentially operate. I guess the overarching theme across our experience and what has kind of been the opportunity for us in partaking in this program, it's that it's allowed us to kind of understand the best practice in terms of delivering these, and as part of our kind of contribution around capability and knowledge sharing, we've been able to develop different playbooks and different innovation guides and approaches which can support and foster the kind of uptake and use of co-creation more specifically in wider context. So all the kind of information and the guides that we've kind of outlined within these different EU programs can all be found online. They're publicly available and usable for people to engage with. So if you want to learn a bit more specifically in terms of the actual methodologies and the approach to delivering innovation within these programs, then feel free to kind of visit those more specifically. If we can move on to the next slide, please. And where's that kind of experience taken us, which I've kind of alluded to really. It's allowed us to really kind of design our own bespoke framework that we like to apply to our different approaches that I mentioned earlier. We generally see this approach of our framework being applied to all the different kind of innovation methodologies we saw, not necessarily just living labs, but test beds, showcases, and demonstrators specifically. And I guess it starts with, following Freya's presentation previously, it's a systematic approach that firstly focuses and defines the challenge. So really understanding the challenge that you're trying to address will help reduce the risk around the solution and its fit for purpose and whether it's actually able to potentially address the challenge that you've initially identified. What we then do is go through that kind of systematic approach. So identifying the different actors and the different stakeholders that are potentially involved in either defining the challenge or setting the parameters for actually testing the solutions with the SMEs. We might see people playing different roles within this. It could be providing kind of expert advice or feedback, as I say, from an end user perspective around the actual functionality and impact the solution may actually have, but identifying who those people are and the way in which they interact with us, either through a program or through a kind of stream of work, is really crucial at this kind of stage. What we then do is we either help to kind of design or pick the relevant solution within the market. This is to look at the actual challenge that we've basically identified and we're looking to address. These solutions aren't always new and emerging technologies, but can be existing innovations that can be applied to new use cases. If it's more from a co-creation perspective, obviously those new existing innovations might be more kind of ideas of new and emerging services that we then help to develop and test with a validated use case through our kind of programs. And then as a team more specifically, or as the kind of role of the urban tech team, we help to deploy these solutions within a real world environment by preparing and managing the actual kind of implementation of the solution. This includes finding relevant infrastructure that might be able to support the deployment phase, or even providing kind of expert and technical support through either our team or through other kind of directorates within the Catapult where we see relevant. Also, I guess as part of the kind of framework that's applied to co-creation more specifically, within this kind of phase as well, we might build in kind of the iterations around actually supporting the testing and development of the solutions that we're actually looking to support. And I guess as part of that kind of phase more generally, we never actually assume that a technology works or that a technology can address the challenge. So we need to ensure that we, as a program and as a mindset, really instill strong monitoring and performance and evaluation that we do kind of independently to assess the impact and the functionality of a solution at that given challenge. This in turn effectively allows us to actually measure the potential impact that a given technology or service may actually have on the real world, or potentially on a citizen's well-being when we look at specifically some of the challenges that we focused in the past. And I guess, how does this kind of all wrap up? And if we can go to the next slide, please, Leanne, next and final slide. It comes to where we're kind of specifically trying to apply our framework in context to future programs of work. So we're currently delivering a program that's called the Homes for Healthy Aging program. This started in January this year. It's effectively a program that's looking to tackle and address the challenge that's been outlined by the government of supporting people to live independently for 5 years longer within their home. The idea around it is that we can find relevant solutions or technologies, and we can co-create relevant solutions and technologies to address a range of healthy aging issues and challenges that have experienced around different regions of the UK and nationally. So it could be challenges to do with the provision of care. It could be challenges around mental and physical health and well-being. But what we look to do and where we're at in terms of the stage is actually kind of defining what those challenges could be. And so what we're looking to do is work with partners and potential testbed locations. These testbed locations could be a combination of consortium members. It could be local authorities or local charities who work within the space of healthy aging. And they have a mandate specifically to address challenges in that space. What we want to do is work with them to understand what are the local challenges and the kind of impact and scale of those challenges that are experienced by those organizations and the people surround those within the regions themselves, and how we can actually address that by delivering testbed locations and support up to 40 SMEs to either develop, test, or showcase their solutions. And we'll work with kind of different stage TRLs, as I say, in relation to the actual approach to co-creation, depending on the scale of the challenge, the capability of the location partner we might be working with, their experience of working with SMEs more specifically, and I guess the uptake of existing solutions in the market. It's likely that we'll tailor the approach per location, whether we actually apply more co-creation approach methodologies that build on the ideas or ideation of solutions that could potentially address challenges, or whether we actually deploy higher level TRL solutions that are already potentially a market fit, or that might already be tackling or addressing challenges in other parallel domains that could be applied to our specific program or specific needs. That's a very quick whistle-stop tour, I guess, of the program, what the kind of opportunity is for people to potentially engage. What we are running is an event that will give you more context and more information on June the 23rd. So if you want to sign up to that, feel free to find it. The link's on Eventbrite, and what I can do, I can include the relevant link into the slide once these slides then get shared around with the audience members today. So thank you very much for the time for the presenting. And if obviously anyone wants to know a bit more about the program, then feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that overview, Ryan, and great that we've made it more than just academic and experiential, but an opportunity for people or for their contacts to get involved and work with us on that particular opportunity. So look forward to discussing that. In a moment, we'll move into the panel discussion part of this, and I welcome throughout for the audience to continue adding questions for the panel, and we'll pick those up and add them into the mix. But just before we go into that, there's another quick poll, if we can put up the second poll, Gail, that will give us a very brief idea of your familiarity with co-creation and the confidence that you feel using as a commissioner or engaging perhaps on the supply side with these methods. I think that'll just help us frame how deep to go into the details of the next section. So I'll give you a moment to fill those in. And I guess I would say also, just whilst you're filling that in, Ryan, you mentioned a few of the great projects that we've run in the past there, the consortium project, and you mentioned that they obviously, each of those projects has an online portal that you can engage in and find a lot more details on there. But of course, if there's even more detail that you'd like to engage with, then by all means get in touch with us, and we can talk to you and tell you more about what we did and how we can support you if that's necessary. So let's pop up the results of this. Thank you very much. Okay, great. So familiarity with detail of what co-creation is could probably do with a little discussion, but people do feel confident with engaging with it to some degree. So some food for thought there, and I'll pass over to Malcolm to start to unpick some of this.
Very good. So I think we're just getting the panel assembled, so you'll be able to see them all together, and I can see them as well, and they can signal to me. So first of all, thank you all very much. I've made lots of notes because there was a lot of very useful material, and I wanted to sort of focus on some of the things that to try and perhaps build up that confidence level that we just saw on that poll. That people were only moderately confident in working in this way. And a number of you mentioned the issues about tackling what might be seen to some potential procurers. And also, interestingly, Freya made a point about suppliers also may feel this is a risky process. Is that what you think? What do you think are the key ways of getting the decision makers? Because I mean, we find in many local authorities, and I'm interested to see whether you share that while there are lots of ideas there, that it does need some leadership from above, who says, "Well, I'm prepared to take this sort of risk." So I was going to ask Greg first, because I think he's had more experience of this with all the projects he's been working in. So how did you get the commissioners of these projects and their leaders to really engage with the process?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's a really pertinent question. When we start engaging with the public sector bodies, we do insist that they have the senior level cover in place, because we know that the conversations will soon be forgotten in months 3, 4, and 5 going onwards. So we do ask for a signed confirmation that they will be involved in the process. And also the resourcing and additional duties that come with running these challenges for the public is not to be overlooked. So we try and be honest and said, this is, you probably need some space away from your daily duties to do a good job on this. And over the years, we've had little bits of support from procurement colleagues as personal development opportunities to put some funding into them, but it's not always the case. But yeah, it's senior cover is essential, and don't underestimate that you will be doing a lot of extra activities. But that said, on the upside, over 50% of the people we worked with who've led the challenge have gone on to better opportunities, because they've seen themselves, put themselves in the spotlight, grasped the challenge and delivered. So it's been really good for their personal development.
That's very good. I'm going to ask Ryan next, because many of your programs are part of making this transition, but maybe some of them don't have a final end customer. So I mean, how do you, in these large scale and very interesting, mapping out future opportunities, developing potential technologies, how do you engage with the potential customers and their leaders to make sure that those ideas, they are prepared to back them, essentially, to take the risk of deploying these ideas?
Yeah, I think is a good question. I guess when we specifically think about the challenges we try to address in terms of place-based innovation, or trying to bring innovation to places, there's both challenges on the kind of demand and supply side of that. So, places more generally don't actually necessarily have the knowledge or the capability to be able to deliver co-creation approaches more specifically, which means they don't actually necessarily know what the kind of art of the possible is. They do have a kind of low appetite for risk and investment more generally, but what we try to do is reduce that risk by bringing our kind of knowledge and capability to helping them understand what existing solutions are in the market, or how you can potentially deliver co-creation methodologies to create innovations around the problems that you face. It's also very kind of apt in terms of our process to deliver, I guess, new innovations. There's always a kind of challenge in trying to support early stage solutions to tackle real use cases. And by addressing challenges and working with places that potentially don't necessarily have that kind of knowledge and capability, it helps foster that kind of relationship of building things around your specific needs and actually helping SMEs to create sustainable and viable solutions that are actually addressing a real use case.
I mean, so Freya, because as you said in your introduction that you had worked with suppliers of innovations, I mean, what's the challenge from the supplier's viewpoint of actually developing a receptive team, a customer team, who's prepared to take a sort of challenge-driven approach? And is that something we should be giving more attention to?
I think so. I mean, I was lucky because I was working in a sector where a lot of research and innovation was being procured, and whilst not perfect, there was an understanding that what they were procuring was research to answer a question. So it could be how do I develop a capability? How do I make decision makers more effective? So they knew that there was a problem, and they also knew that there wasn't an off-the-shelf solution. So they were already in that headspace that they needed to work with whoever the supplier was to go on that development journey to get to their sunny uplands. So, we were pushing on an open door, but even so, depending on who or which team was writing the invitation to tender, you would get a sense, you'd kind of assign a little informal confidence level in your head. How confident am I as a responder that they really understand their challenge? And that's not meant to be arrogant. It would then, do we leave a big space? So in my sort of 10 minutes, I talked about weaving in a discovery phase. And we would actually quite often call it that, so that you'd have your kickoff with your customer, assuming that you've won, and then you would have some time to just go back and go, tell me more about your challenge, and work with them and unpick it. And I'd say 50% of the time, we then agreed a contract change to say, that's you need to go that direction, not this direction. Yeah. So it was that creation was on many levels.
Yes, but I mean, coming back to your side about innovation, of course, there are many companies. I mean, we're talking specifically about selling to the private sector, but of course, I mean, I spent 30 years in the car industry working in product planning and engineering, and I mean, that you described the sort of process you go through very well, with lots of changes. But how do we get our potential customers in the public service to set the challenges in a really ambitious way? I mean, some of Greg's case studies were really fascinating because your programs have been bold enough to set a really big picture question, like making the roads more, reducing the number of motorcycle accidents, to really stretch people and the potential suppliers to come up with some really, really interesting solutions, and absolutely trying to avoid predetermining that. So I mean, Greg, was that the same with all your projects? Or are there some lessons that we can learn from what you've done?
I think building on Freya's point is really understanding the challenge from both ends of the telescope, because when we, for example, the nursing time challenge, when it first came to us, was they wanted to reduce the administration on nurses. And then we tried to we pushed and said, well, what does success look like? What is an outcome of reduced administration? And it dawned on them there's actually more effective bedside nursing care. So that's the objective. They wanted to have more time nurses spending at the bedside rather than filling in data. So we workshopped the whole concept of what would be achievable, what would be realistic. And we came up with this 10% metric. And from the provider's position, access to that intelligent lead customer, access to the frontline staff, it wasn't an IT requisition that was dumped on them. It was worked with them. So big buttons, work with latex gloves, they fitted in a tunic pocket, all those sort of subtleties, which sometimes get overlooked in the procurement process, because it was fed up from the bottom, it really did make a difference.
Yeah. But I mean, they're the sort of things that, I mean, if you were producing stuff commercially, you should be thinking about with the customer as well, actually. But I mean, the point you're making is a really interesting one about, and it's really, you've also said this about the co-creation. So Ryan's, I mean, what is your experience in running a number of these programs, in how you engage with the end customers? We've had some questions so far which are more prompted, which we'll handle offline because there are people asking for more information, which we'll pass to you. But there's one very specific question about someone, for example, who's now captured on to your healthy aging program. So you'll be hearing from them. But I mean, how do we get the end users working more upstream in the process, which I think is really what this is all about in the co-creation process?
Yeah, sure. I think firstly, in terms of the Homes Fair Healthy Aging program, defining who the end user is has been a really, really crucial thing for us to identify, because when you think about working in the health sector, an end user could potentially be an elderly individual who is engaging with a piece of technology. However, there's obviously a lot of kind of complexities or messiness around engaging or working with people of that demographic, of that nature, especially if it comes to deploying solutions within their home. But one of the lenses we're kind of looking at through the program as well is the end user potentially the provider of care? Could we look at challenges around the provision of care more generally? And could it be that we support the deployment of technology by interacting with nurses, interacting with community care workers? So a big thing for us, first of all, is defining who that end user is, and then thinking about the interactions that we probably need to flesh out in terms of how do we capture that information. A couple of examples we're thinking about is if we are due to be deploying technology within the home and we're engaging with an end user, it's likely that we'd facilitate diary studies to capture the kind of feedback and iteration or potential development that can be integrated into the solution development phase itself. If it's in relation to the community care worker, then it's likely that what we'd do is establish a kind of local task force, which would have different roles and responsibilities of probably managing the kind of day-to-day activities on the ground and being able to be as close to the kind of interaction of the technology in its given environment to be able to feed back to us directly. So it's something we're really trying to work out now on this program, and it feels that it can take many different facets, which is really interesting for us to explore because it's kind of like uncharted territory for us as well.
Yeah. Well, can I then perhaps move the discussion on about some of the interventions that might be possible? I mean, apart from obviously finding public sector customers and developing them to do that, but it's quite clear that demonstration projects, and particularly successful ones, are really extremely powerful. I mean, that's been our observation, research on this. I mean, Ryan, you reminded me that in my own region here, we had a program several years ago where they actually built or converted a house with aging living technology. I think it was in the Black Country somewhere. So that is, if you like, a proven possibility for intervention. And Freya's program, where she showed the difference between what first your team came up with and then consulted was fundamentally different. So are we actually, because there's quite a lot of money going into wanting deployment and deploying more innovations, but are we actually spending it in the right way? What would your advice be to people in the Cabinet Office who want to reform the Green Paper and Innovate UK? If you were each given that opportunity, what would you change, or what new opportunities would you be funding? Freya, you can start on that one.
I have in my head a classic graph that, as a human factors professional, we kind of run around with, which is the importance of early prototyping and hashing out what will and won't work when it's still on paper. So, you know, we used to talk about that threshold before you cut metal, because I've worked in engineering companies for a long time. Yeah. So whilst something is still a concept and it's still an idea, it's really cheap to change, because you might be prototyping using Post-it notes or PowerPoint or paper. Yeah. If your stakeholders and your end users, which just to say aren't always your customer, can't use it, don't like it, or they love it, it's really easy to build and iterate. I think the challenge is that there is a lot of push, again, in program delivery plans and procurement plans to push us to showing really tangible progress, which I think risks shortchanging that really early phase where you can try out lots of different things and the cost is really low. The further down that maturity scale, where you've maybe got a proof of concept or you're piloting something, then it starts to get a lot more expensive to change your mind, and you're almost locked in. So it's do all your messy stuff as early as possible, even if that comes at the expense of demonstrating progress, because it'll save you money and de-risk in the long run.
Okay. So Greg, I put you on the spot then. I mean, do you think the SBRI program does that well enough, or is it something that we should be looking at? Because we might have, because that's after all, I mean, so SPRI is not a legal program. I mean, it's one that's been constructed from experience. So
the stages of the SPRI do sort of go somewhere. You know, you have the feasibility stage. So you do, you know, as Freya was saying, a lot of the desktop stuff, the non-expensive stuff. And then you call those guys in for interview, because it's a bit like the Dragon's Den. You're buying the people as well as the technology. So the ability to deliver, keep to the time scale, keep to the project plan. You've got to be convinced as the panel that these guys are up to it as well. So it's the reassurance and the comfort factor. You get that they understand the challenge, they understand the brief, they can deliver. And then as they go in, those, you know, 2 horses selected to go into the demonstration phase, you're hedging your bets. You've got you know, the 2 technologies or 2 solutions working, reporting back. And then at the end of it, you still have that pause and reflect moment as the procurer to say, right, you've done your time, you've demonstrated your project. Let's have a draw breath here. Let's check if the market's moved on, because, you know, the market could have moved on in different ways. If the problem is still the same scale, or you can sort of start the procurement process for real, for looking out for that solution. So the process, again, it's a nice framework. You know, we've tweaked it a little bit with, you know, 1 stage or combined feasibility just for expediency, but it is pretty good. But I'm keen to do more. What Freya's suggesting around the collaborations with academia. That's something, you know, that, you know, we'll be looking to do in terms of looking at how a supplier can unlock and accelerate those TRL levels with the help of academic institutions and deliver, because the universities are not the fastest to market in terms of, you know, some of their outputs.
Yeah. Well, in a sense, you'd anticipated my future question, which have been Ryan's a lot of experience with, but is should we be looking more to building consortiums of a consortium of different technology providers and act more as a sort of technology integrator, if you like? I mean, I imagine many of Ryan's programs, particularly with, will need such a big range of skills. I mean, the innovation partnership, a tool which I worked on, was partly intended to do that. And I mean, there have been some uses of that, but is that something, again, we should be promoting much more strongly and saying to potential customers, you know, if you find a coordinator, an integrator, or even do it yourselves, you may be able to get some really exciting and innovative ideas, and that would include university partners in particular. I mean, Ryan, do your programs work in that way? I mean, do you act as a sort of system integrator in some programs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best example I can use, or the best way to frame it, is very similar to what we're delivering on the Homes for Healthy Aging program at the minute. is that we as the Catapult are kind of more acting as the driving force and the convener of a market, or markets more generally. We're engaging with locations, as I said, that could be local authorities, but it could also be a consortium of academia, local authorities, NGOs, people who are sharing the space and sharing the challenges, or would like to see potentially impact on addressing said challenges in that effectively that same realm. And what we're looking to do is build collaborations around a shared problem, because you bring in the relevant expertise. It reduces the risk of one party burdening either the shoulder of the full delivery or the full cost in that respect. And we really feel that by almost instilling that co-creation, by instilling that collaboration as an approach, we can potentially increase the scale at which we work. So the size of potentially the labs that we work on, which means that we can reach more people, and that in turn, hopefully we can see more impact on citizen well-being more generally in relation to, well, particularly healthy aging in terms of the domain we're looking at the minute.
Yeah. Freya, what's your experience of working with consortiums of suppliers, or how do you think we should approach that if it's a valuable tool?
No, completely. It's really, really beneficial. So again, in the sector I spent most of my time in, it was almost a given that even though we were a big prime organization, that we would by default partner with universities and SMEs. And it was kind of known as the sort of magic mix. And, for all the reasons that I touched on in my last slide, the universities are very good at that blue sky, that early research piece, but you need to bring the sort of really delivery focus that you get in the private sector and the SMEs. And then the SMEs are super fleet of foot. And so bringing us all together, you get the rigor and the delivery expertise of a very big organization with all the other ingredients. It worked really, really well.
Yeah. So just a final question from me before I ask each of you to give me a big idea to sum up with, which I hope you'll do. One of the things I thought, again, was very interested about the case studies we've heard from all of you is that there is developing a lot of innovation in service delivery and service provision. And I mean, one of the concerns I have sometimes when I'm doing these meetings is that people think about innovation and innovation procurement specifically in terms of technological solutions, whereas actually the delivery could be combining technology but with completely reinventing the way it's delivered. And a thing about service commissioning. I mean, it's interesting that a number of innovation partnerships, a significant number, because there are far more than the government acknowledged in its green paper, have actually come in delivery of social services. And sometimes using non-profit organizations. And those don't really get a lot of publicity. So, I mean, is that your experience? And if so, should we be doing more about reaching out to the people who are delivering big scale services and supporting communities? Who'd like to start on that? Greg, what do you think? Because I think you've worked, a number of your projects have been about delivering a new forms of service, which I think is very exciting.
I think earlier this year, we've done a COVID recovery challenge. So build back greener, better lives closer to home, and sort of a green economy as well. So we're looking at those softer process things around the community, really hyper local, if you like, to try and get communities engaged, and skills, employment opportunity, access to training, health and well-being. So yeah, it is something that we're looking at. It is something which we'll probably do more of going forward as well.
Yeah. Freya.
I think I'd like to see a lot more involvement of the end users of services, and a lot more work around mapping their experiences as they go through that end-to-end service. So, journey mapping. Because I think a lot of the time I would be observing service redesign and improvement, but from the perspective of the service provider, which will deliver you efficiencies, but not necessarily the service quality that you're after, because actually the people who can tell you whether that service works or not for them and what their experience of engaging with it is and how easy is it to use, is it pleasurable, frustrating, are the people on the receiving end trying to use that service. So, there's a challenge. How do we involve them a lot more and learn from their experiences and design new services that then make their life easier in some way?
And Ryan, well, you're working out really this some of the core issues that you're now embarking on with your aged housing program. Yeah,
and I would agree with some of the points that Freya just mentioned as well. I think for me, I would like to see some kind of mandate or drive from government or from funders to invest in infrastructure. Trying to test out solutions or developing solutions more generally it can be a costly expense for anyone who's partaking in that without having a kind of fit for purpose or a validated use case to actually test them on, or at least to understand if they're fit for purpose. If there is sufficient infrastructure where we can create controlled environments where these solutions can be developed and tested within, relatively realistic environments, then the time and effort of organizations can actually be spent more on probably incentivizing the end users to partake in those programs or partake in those, again, controlled environments where we'll see greater value on the participation levels. We'd see greater value in terms of the feedback that the solution providers are getting. And we'd also see, I guess, more sustainable practices around how we can actually develop and co-create solutions for the future effectively. Because the risk that we run at the minute is funding places, funding local authorities to deliver innovations locally. But one of the big questions for us is how do we see this as being sustainable longer term? Is it something that needs to be continually funded? And what's the kind of route to market for these solutions to scale effectively? So if we can at least cut some of the costs and some of the decisions out by having the infrastructure in place, and I think that's a kind of big pain point for a lot of people.
Well, interesting, just while we were talking, and after I placed the first question, Elvira Uraya, who leads the Manchester team working on in our research project that CRISP, that Ollie mentioned earlier. Incidentally, I see CRISP as also one of Greg's projects as well, but we added an extra P to our end. He can tell you about it. But she makes the point, and we touched it tangentially, that we should be encouraging more collaboration between authorities and customers who may not have the sort of scale to support these programs, which is a point that Greg made right at the beginning, actually, about some resistance because of the scale and the complexity of the investment. But if people shared all that, we could bring down the relative cost benefit ratio, and that doesn't necessarily disadvantage the production of solutions or a toolkit that smaller authorities could use. I mean, there seems to be quite a lot we could manage without that. I mean, really, your project, Ryan, is essentially potentially doing that. But what do you think, Greg, about that? I mean, how easy have you found it to get local authorities to work together on some of these projects?
At different scale sometimes. Once we've worked up a challenge with one public sector body, then we've had stakeholder conversations and say some of the Whitehall departments have said, well, actually, we'd like to be part of that. That's a problem for us. It's not just a problem in Wales. So we've managed to collaborate with a number of Whitehall departments as lead-in because of resourcing, but they've put some support behind the project as well. So the sharing of the ideas, the problems, refining them with other collaborators is a way forward.
I mean, I think one of your projects you did with Durham as well, didn't you? So they don't need to be neighbouring authorities.
No, yeah, so, it's the GovTech one was with Durham,
yeah. Very good. Well, thank you all very much for a very comprehensive responses, and it's added a lot of richness to your very good presentations. So I'm just going to ask you, and I'll start with Ryan and then Freya and then Greg to finish with. So you've got 1 minute to just give us what you think is the most critical issue or the takeaway that you'd like to leave our audience with today. So Ryan, I'm not going to time you, by the way, so there's not a clock starting like it is in the European Parliament when you get up to speak.
Sure. I'll keep it short and brief. I think in order to support kind of co-creation more specifically, you need to build a pool of relevant stakeholders and willful and motivated individuals who are trying to address the same challenge. Without having that, then you're likely to not get the relevant feedback or the relevant technologies or the relevant definition of the challenge that you're trying to address. So I think having a combination of people who really want to drive change and bring kind of impact to whatever situation they're experiencing, then I think that's crucial to co-creation methodologies.
Thank you. Freya?
So I want to pull on something that Greg highlighted and just emphasize it. So the co-creation doesn't have to start when you've defined your challenge and you're looking for a supplier to develop a solution. My recommendation and my takeaway would be actually procure somebody to help you understand your challenge and define your outcomes. So it can be right at the beginning when you're grappling in that, we know we have a problem. How do we solve it? Co-create.
Good. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, I think on the positive side, the challenge-led arena is becoming more exciting. There's lots of people doing it now, but my only concern is there's a risk of confusion in the market with many players offering variants on the theme. So I think we just be mindful of not confusing the public sector bodies and the suppliers on what stream that they're actually following and what the differences are. And then from a practical perspective, the dynamic purchasing register on procurement, so if we can get that to work seamlessly with some of the solutions, we can then actually get businesses selling their solutions into the public sector a lot quicker, rather than a perceived cliff edge and then wait and go through the procurement process and then pick up from there.
Yeah, very good point. Well, you've given us a lot to work on, and our research group is working on some of these already, so it's been extremely valuable. Thank you all very much indeed, and I'm going to hand back to Oliver Kirsch just to talk about our future plans and close the meeting. Ollie.
Sure, thank you very much, everybody. And actually, Greg's closing comment about the cliff edge at the end of trials and test beds is a really important one. I suspect we will come back and discuss in more detail later. Thank you very much for all of that discussion from all of the participants. I guess one of the things that I will just do at the end here to see whether we've changed any minds within the audience is just to run the same poll or similar poll that we ran prior to the start of discussion. So the first question is about how confident you feel engaging with these methods, which we did ask before. And then another question, which is how beneficial do you think these co-creation methods that we've discussed are? So I'll give you a moment to fill those out. Leanne, if you can just pop up the final slide with the upcoming events at the same time, that would probably be helpful. So here we have a suite of upcoming events from CPC teams. I would love to welcome you to any of these events. In particular, I'll draw your attention to the one at the bottom, which is just to say that we are taking a summer break from this challenging procurement series that normally runs on a monthly basis. But our next session will be in the 7th of September, which will have a focus on innovation procurement for local transport, picking out some best practice for this particular application space, and sharing some of the work that the CPC has been working on. We'll send out information in the coming weeks, but just to highlight that. Also, I should highlight, since Malcolm's on the call, that that Malcolm is speaking at the public sector show at the end of the month, and we'll be talking about some of the themes that we've touched on today, but in a broader context. And finally, to say to everybody else, if you have an interest in this work, whether it be in some of the items that we've discussed today, whether it's interest in speaking on this series or a